Hi, this is Andy on my channel, West Valley 411. This is the continuation of our video on the oak door restoration project. And I ran out of storage on my phone, so I had to upload part one. And what I wanted to do is wrap up the sanding piece, and then we're going to get into staining and then putting on the polyurethane finish. Probably 95% of the work has already been done, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. So let me grab the phone and show you that to wrap up your sanding, I would suggest getting yourself a stiff bristle brush and one of these pickers so you can get out all of the sawdust that's in the corner of your molding and in other areas throughout the channels on your door. Now, not only did I use the picker and brush, but I've got some compressed air that was really handy to get the sawdust out. And then just to check to see if there was any sawdust left after blasting it with some compressed air, I took a clean paper towel and ran it along the main boards and up and around the panels. And you can see it's still picked up, you know, some additional sawdust. So maybe it's a little OCD, but now it's really clean. So don't forget you're dealing with some volatile organic compounds when you're using stain. So like I mentioned in part one of the video, I've got a respirator with a 6001 cartridge on it. And then just to point out, anytime you're using stain, you've got to be in an extremely well ventilated area. And really, no matter where you are, you probably need to wear a respirator because your face is right over the can. And there's warnings on the label. If you've sanded anything with lead, breathing the dust can cause brain damage. It also talks about organic compounds having effect on your nervous system. And then, of course, don't put any rags that contain stain in a pile because it's a fire hazard. So when we put on the polyurethane finish, we're going to use some of these foam brushes, but for the stain, we're going to use just a regular brush. So let's get started. All right, the rule with stain is to stir it up, apply what you can put on in 2 to 3 minutes, and then wipe it off. Okay, that's our beautiful golden color. Looks great. The stain tends to pool alongside some of the panels there. So you got to try not to get too a darker color. So we'll just continue. All right, we're going to continue finishing the panels, and the stain guidance says that you're supposed to let it dry an hour, but we're going to leave it overnight because it really needs to thoroughly dry. Full disclosure, a couple of things I would have done differently. If you look right here, there was a little bit of discoloration from an area that I tried to fill from one of the brads. I probably would not fill that because you can see here there's another brad that was not filled and doesn't really look too bad. And then unfortunately, see if you can tell here in the light from maybe this angle. No, can't really see it there. Let's try this angle. I took that palm sander, which is not random orbital, it's just a straight up and down jig, and you can see I ran it along this area thinking I could make it to the flat part where I sand with the grain, and I see some lines. You can kind of see some streaks in there. I'm going to resand that lightly with 220 and then resand it because that's only going to accentuate a little bit more when we put the polyurethane finish on it. So my suggestion is to, if you see any shiny areas, go back with your rags, wipe them up. Staining has to be one of the most satisfying of all of these processes because it's fast, it's easy, and it brings out the natural color in the wood. So now that we're finished sanding, we're ready to get on with, to me, the most challenging part of refinishing, and that is applying the polyurethane. Because I always have questions about, am I applying enough? Am I applying too much? Did I allow it to dry enough between coats? If I do need to sand, am I taking off too much to finish, and am I leaving too much dust? So you just really have to kind of get on with it. I'm going to be using these foam brushes. I've got 1, 2, and 3 inch sizes. They're come in a package like this. I got this at Harbor Freight, and the nice thing is they're disposable. So between coats, you can just throw them away. Now, if you're like me and you read the instructions on the can, I'm going to be using an exterior water-based polyurethane. You may have experience with water and oil-based, but we're going to be using water-based because I'm pretty satisfied with the color, and oil-based finishes have a tendency to deepen the color a little bit, which I'm not necessarily wanting to do. So here are some don'ts according to the instructions. Number 1, don't shake the can because you'll introduce bubbles. Don't overbrush because you'll introduce bubbles. And don't use a roller because as the roller goes around, you may introduce bubbles and you'll have more to sand off. So things to do are apply between temperatures of 55 degrees and about 90 degrees. Make sure you wear a respirator. Instructions also tell you to allow at least 2 hours to dry. If it's humid or cooler, it's going to take a little bit longer. And if you allow more than 12 hours between coats, you're supposed to sand. So that's the challenge. Is it dry enough? If it's completely dry in over 12 hours, then I have to sand. So we're going to be using a sanding pad. This is the 3M ultrafine hand sanding pad between coats. That way we'll take off any imperfections, you know, run your fingers over the surface and see where it's at. So this should, it says removes bubbles, nibs, and other blemishes. I'd prefer to use these than actual sandpaper, but we'll see where we're at and how effective it is. So let's get started. The temperature is good today to apply this urethane, so we're going to get started, and you can see as you open the can, the material is white. We're going to stir that up. I've got a paint roller liner that I'm going to put the brushes in as we work around the door. We're going to start in the middle and go out, and I do want to correct one thing I said about recoats, and that is you have to wait. If you wait 24 hours, then you have to sand. So we're gonna check the dried surface, use our sanding pads, and scuff up any nibs or bubbles or other blemishes, and then hopefully we won't have to sand any further. All right, let's get started. Take off my mask for a second. We just wrapped up the first coat. It took an hour and a half, and one of the best ways to follow your wet and dry line is just a reflection in the light. You can see that's the last part that I did. That first coat gets absorbed into the wood. Ultimately, the bubbles were not really an issue. They tend to go away on their own. One thing I learned is the foam brush does a much better job of spreading on flat surfaces, and the slower you go with a smooth stroke, it lays down a perfect coat. So let's see if we can get a little reflection in the light. Parts of it are still drying and getting absorbed. So overall, looks really good, and we'll keep going. I wanted to point out how much of the urethane I used in this can. So it was full, and it's down probably 3/4 of an inch. This door is 3 by 8, so that's 24 square feet. And the can here says that it coverage is 60 to 90. So I am thinking that considers 3 to 4 coats. So if we get down to here by the 3rd, 4th coat, then we should be good. But we completely covered the wood, so couldn't really make it any more wet on this first coat. It's 3.5 hours after the first coat has dried, and just running my hand along, I can feel very slight areas that are raised up. Maybe it's part of the grain. Maybe it's where there was an overlap of urethane, but we're just going to take our sanding pads, ultrafine sanding pads, and run them over the top, following the grain. And that's nice and smooth. So we're ready for the second coat. We should start to see more of a shine. So kind of looking in the reflective light here, kind of a real dull satin sheen, but should start to improve quite a bit. As we get ready to lay down the second coat, I just wanted to point out the bristles to this brush, you can see, are somewhat congealed together. It's not going to give me that nicer pattern, so I'm not going to use this brush again. And just a note on this 1-inch foam pad, you can see there's a little bit of material missing from that tip. So that's going to leave a groove, so we're not going to use that one. I didn't use the 2-inch at all, so nothing to worry about there. And then the 3-inch is in pretty good shape. I think we're going to use it again. It might be beneficial because it's still pretty spongy. Finger is a little bit wet, so there's probably some undried urethane in there. So we'll give it a shot. Maybe it'll help reduce the bubbles. Again, open the can, stir, no shake. I put the brushes in plastic bag overnight, like I usually do when I'm painting. And with the exception of that deformity at the top, you can see it's still moist. And look at the foam the bubbles that's generated when I press down on it. That's what happens on the stroke. And this brush can be reused too. It's still real moist. So we'll get started on the 3rd coat. I put a 4th coat on over the flat surfaces, and you can see it's got a really nice shine, got really good coverage, and the finish is done. All right, moving on to the threshold pieces. This needs to be sanded and painted here. There's even an original cut down from the manufacturer that looks like it never got painted. So we'll sand that and use an satin enamel spray paint. Just shake it up till you hear the ball. So we'll give that some work. Some of these sheet metal screws are a little discolored, so we'll sand the surface of that and repaint them. And then moving on to the lock set, I went over to a locksmith and asked about replacing this. It was a couple $100, and you can see, I'm not sure if that's permanent damage or just some kind of tarnish. So got a couple of products at the house that we're gonna try to fix that with. They did mention they smell quite a bit, so got to do it outside. And both of these products say that they've got ammonia, so it can be hazardous. Just about anything you do in furniture restoration is going to have some kind of chemical in it, which makes sense because that's the active ingredient. So we'll apply that and see if that makes a difference. If it does, I'll show it to you as it's coming off. If not, we'll just clean it up, polish it, and put it back on the door. We are set up to paint the screws for the door guard. And what I typically do is just take a screwdriver, press it into some soft wood, give yourself a little starter for the screws, and then just screw them in one rotation so they're upright. And then make sure your can's shaking. We'll apply a couple coats. Not too heavy. And then for the door guard, same thing. We got it all sanded with 200 grit sandpaper. We'll just make couple of passes. Then we'll let that dry. One more here on this end.
And we'll let that dry and apply another coat and then repeat on the other side. All right, the painting is done and we're ready to go to the next step. I just wanted to point out whoever installed this piece missed the midpoint of the door because it overlaps on that side and it's a little bit short on this side. But 6 holes already exist on the door and I did not want to create 6 more. So just a quick note of terminology. This is actually called the rain deflector, and it keeps water from going from the door to the top of the threshold to inside your house. So I did notice that on the inside of it, there are a couple of holes that allow it to drain out in case water gets inside the drip. So there's one on that side and there's one on that side. And on the bottom of this drip reflector is a strip of rubber that's called the door sweep. So it keeps air and drafts from going underneath your door to get inside your house. So we'll put that on. I think the paint came out really well. And then the last thing we'll do is the key set. I am pleasantly surprised at how well this severe tarnish is coming off the brass door handle. You can see how much this has been cleaned up here. I still have a little bit of work to do around this joint and on the back side, but compare that to the area where I haven't done as much work here. Got to get in between the thumb press and the top here, and the key is you got to rub hard and you got to rub long in the same place. So I thought this was a job that I could get my wife to help with because I'm busy and she's not quite as skilled. And she said she tried it 3 separate times and it wouldn't come off. But here's the key, and this is always the important thing whenever you're working with products. You've got to use, for heavy tarnish, apply with pressure. So I've probably rubbed about 100 times in each area, sending it down on a flat surface. Here you can see with the internal parts hung below this board. And so we'll continue to work on that till it's completely cleaned up. And this is kind of a nice surprise to see it so shiny. So just get yourself a couple socks, keep it wet, rub it off, use your gloves to keep the ammonia off your hands, and you'll be good to go. It is 10 o'clock in the morning, and you can see how the sun hits that front entryway. You've probably been wondering, hey, what has he got in the space that the oak door used to be? Well, that's what it is. And right now the sun is hitting the door about halfway up. Earlier in the morning, the angle is about 3/4. And as the sun's moving from this side to the back, because that's the west, it's going to set, and the angle is going to slowly go up. So in the summer it's going to be a direct hit in the morning. And so it's just set up with a ladder and some protection, and the same thing on the inside to keep the draft off. So all right, now it's time to paint the door threshold, and I wasn't originally going to include this in the video, but it took me over 2 hours to vacuum up the leaves, get the spiders out of there, sand the threshold, tape it up, cover the porch, and basically complete all the prep to get a nice clean spray that only takes about 30 seconds. So I got some paper up, slid it up underneath that edge. It kept ripping. I had to keep redoing it. And we got everything else covered. So
We'll put 2 coats on, and that'll match the drip guard, the rain drip guard on the front door. Here is a close-up of the overspray, and as you can see, we got nice coverage. I removed all the plastic and covering on the porch, but the paper looks like it took care of most of it. So except for a little dust, looks like we got a nice result. I'm very happy to say our door was successfully mounted. The threshold was painted. Everything looks fantastic. The color's great. I do advise having some help mounting the door. This is over 200 pounds and it took 3 of us. You want to make sure when you're angling the door back it's level and flush. Otherwise, if you put too much weight on one of the hinges, you might break one out of the door frame. So our hardware looks great. It buffed out really nicely. And the color is amazing. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching. If you learned at least one thing from all of my trials, I think I'll feel good and knowing that it helped your project. Please post any questions. I'll be happy to answer. And if you're a professional, tell me what you think. The color match on the door was really good too. Let me open it up and take a look at the color here. It's a little bit darker inside, but well, that's kind of hard to see. But here you might be able to tell. Well, there's a bit of a shadow and light difference, so it's a little bit harder to see. But overall, I'm very happy. Thank you again for watching, and good luck with your project.